Part 8. The beyond state of God, the first urge in the cycle of evolution and involution of consciousness. The beyond state of God. To begin with the beyond, the beginning, there is the original state of the beyond state of God, or Paratpar Parabrahma. This is the original state of God is. In Sufi terms, this state is said to be the state of Wara ul Wara. In the original state of God is unbounded, absolute vacuum prevails. Hey, butterfly. In this absolute vacuum, there is neither any manifestation of the consciousness or unconscious state of God, nor is there manifestation of the consciousness or unconscious of God. Neither is there the unlimited I, the divine ego or the universal ego, nor is there the limited I or the individual ego. Neither is there universal mind, nor is there limited mind. Neither is there unbounded energy, nor is there limited energy. Neither is there the universal body, the Mahakarana Sharir, nor is there the limited body. Neither are there universes, nor are there worlds. There is not even consciousness of either the consciousness Mahachatnitanya or of the unconsciousness. The state is absolutely the original unbounded absolute vacuum state of God. Neither the Nirguna Nirakar nor the Saguna Sakar states of God, where God is and consciousness is not. When it is said God is, it describes the state which prevails beyond the beginning of creation. Thanks for the likes. Hi, Sky. I just started. This state here, the chapter's called Part 8, the beyond state of God, the first urge, and the cycle of evolution and involution of consciousness. The state of God is also called the original divine sound sleep state of God, in the beyond state. The God is state is the state of infinitude. Infinitude by virtue of being infinite is everything. That is, everything is the nature of infinitude. Everything, by virtue of being everything, embodies even nothing, or else everything can never mean everything. This nothing is latent in the everything, but nothing, being literally nothing, the very being of being, nothing is nothing at all. But nothing, being literally nothing, the very being of being, nothing is nothing at all. Does that mean nothing doesn't exist? I don't know. What up, Divinity? Huh, thanks. Alright. As this nothing is latent in the everything, the nothingness of the nothing is embedded in the everything as the latency. Thus, the infinitude of the God is state, all that is latent in the nature of infinity, which is everything, is the nothing. Therefore, anything that is latent in everything is of the nothing. I'll be honest, I'm barely following along with this. In short, except for the infinity of the infinitude, all things are latent in the God is state of everything, and all that is latent is of the nothing, with all its aspects as nothingness. Except for the infinity of the infinitude, all things are latent in the God is state of everything, and all that is latent is of the nothing with all its aspects of nothingness. So like a yin and yang kind of thing going on here. Yeah, right? In the God is state where the nothing is latent, automatically by the nature of nothingness, consciousness also exists as nothing. Accordingly, consciousness is the beyond state of God, is ever and ever latent in God, who is by nature the everything, infinite and unlimited and unbounded. Thus, automatically, by his very nature of being everything, God, in the God is state, has in him ever and ever infinite power, infinite knowledge, infinite bliss, and all that is infinitely glorious or beautiful. Because God is the everything and the infinite, the opposite of the everything, which is the nothing, must be most finite. Therefore, the nothing is latent in the God is state as the most finite, or in the infinite state of God, which is everything, there is latent the most finite state of the nothing. So I guess that means it's... I don't know what they mean by latent. Does it exist or not? It is only natural that when this latent and most finite nothing manifests, it ought to manifest as most finite. But it is a most paradoxical fact that when this most finite nothing manifests, the manifestation gradually expands ad infinitum. So that means it kind of doesn't exist, but it's latent. And when nothingness manifests, it expands infinitely. The thing that gives infinity to this most finite nothing is God's own latent trio nature of infinite power, infinite knowledge, and infinite bliss, which, by virtue of being the nature of God, obviously pervades the infinitude of the God is state latently. Naturally, this infinite trio nature also envelops this most finite nothing when latent in the infinity of the everything. Om point. New chapter. Therefore, when this most finite nothing becomes manifested as nothingness, the manifestation of the most finite nothing closely linked with and stretched forth by the simultaneous projection of the latent all-pervading infinite trio nature of God gradually expands ad infinitum and gets apparently manifested as infinite nothingness or the creation, and hence the universe of nothingness, which is illusory, can be called God's shadow, and God being infinite, his shadow is also infinite. Oh, okay, that's starting to make more sense. That ties back into earlier, how it says that there's 4 different planes of existence, sort of, and the top one is God, is the oversoul, and so that would be everything. And then it's saying that the other 3 that were latent in God, when manifested, becomes only shadows, which are not real, which is what we're experiencing right now, is one of those planes. All right. Back to it then. When it manifests, the nothing, which is most finite and latent in the everything, projects out from a most finite point in the everything where the nothing as most finite is embodied. The most finite point from where the nothing projects out as nothingness is called the creation point, or the Om point, which I've heard in Buddhism as well. Yeah, you're with me. This creation point is naturally also in the everything, which means in God, in the beyond state. So yeah, the from which everything sprang forth. But everything being just a shadow of what is real. So the most finite nothing projects as the creation out of the infinite everything through the most finite creation point into the infinity of the infinitude of the God is state. In short, when the most finite nothing gets projected as nothingness through the most finite creation point, which is also in the infinity pervaded by the infinite trio nature of God, the projection of the most finite nothingness, closely linked with and upheld by the all-pervading infinite trio nature of God, gradually expands ad infinitum and manifests apparently as infinite nothingness or as infinite creation. That's wild. Infinite nothingness is infinite creation is what I just took from that. Next chapter, the whim or lahar, the cause which led the most finite nothing latent in the infinite everything to manifest itself as infinite nothingness is the original cause called the, in all caps, cause. The cause is just nothing but the whim or lahar of God. This original whim can also be called the first word uttered by God. Who am I? The infinitude of the God is state made God absolutely independent, and by virtue of being absolutely independent, it is but natural for God to exercise his infinite whim to experience and enjoy his own infinity. To exercise a whim is always the mark of an independent nature, because it is whimsicality that always colors the independent nature. It is the original infinite whim which is responsible for giving cause to the latent all that was of the nothing to manifest as nothingness. But before God exercised his original infinite whim to make manifest the latent all that was of the nothing, this whim of God was itself latent as the nothing in the everything, of the infinitude of absolutely independent God in the God is state. How is it then possible for the latent original infinite whim to surge in God and make manifest itself and all that is latent of the nothing as nothingness? Whim, after all, is a whim, and by its very nature it is such that why, therefore, when can find no place in its nature. A whim may come at any moment. It may come now, or after a few months, or after a few years, and it may not come at all. Similarly, the original infinite whim, after all, is a whim, and, too, it is the whim of God in the state of infinitude. This whim may not surge in God at all, and if it surges, either at any moment, or after thousands of years, or after a million cycles, it need not be surprising. Did that just say that all of creation is just a whim? Here's a cool chart. Not sure if you can read that. Sort of, almost. Probably not. I will read it. So if, let's see here. There we go. So here we have the original whim, and then this first bubble is beyond God, is state, unconscious of self and of illusion. And then we have the second one is beyond God, conscious of self and three infinite aspects, but unconscious of illusion, no pattern or design, since there is only oneness. And then this little part is God, creator, preserver, destroyer, conscious of illusion, unconscious of self. And then we have illusion down here. Same pattern and design, but innumerable and varied forms of display. And this little mark right here at the bottom of the first loop means the original whim surged, and God is creator, preserver, and destroyer manifested with his paraphernalia. Creator is himself created. Preserver is himself preserved. Destroyer is himself destroyed. So we have creator, preserver, destroyer are all here. Alright, that might get explained more somewhere else. Usually there's a reference to the pictures. Thus it is that the original infinite whim of God in the state of infinitude once surged, and it surged both spontaneously and all of a sudden in absolutely independent God who is internally eternal. Hence his whim, which once surged, once began the beginning of all things in creation. In short, this original infinite latent whim of God in the state of infinitude, once it surged in God who is absolutely independent, made itself manifest, and simultaneously with its manifestation, it manifested the latent all that was of the nothing as nothingness. Thus the whim created nothing. So confusing. Let us recapitulate how infinite nothing came out of most finite everything. Yes, we need a lot of recapitulation. God beyond is infinite everything. Infinite everything may be compared to an infinite limitless ocean. Therefore, this limitless ocean is infinite everything. Thus, every drop in the ocean is most finite everything. In short, if infinite ocean is infinite, everything, then every drop of the ocean is most finite everything. So each drop in the ocean contains the entire ocean. Earth is the highest vibration of hell and the lowest vibration of heaven. Okay. I believe you. Before the whim surges... what up, Wicked? Before the whim surges in the limitless ocean, and before creation is manifested, the creation point, Om, through which the creation is ejected, is itself in the limitless ocean as infinite everything, because prior to the surging of the whim, perfect tranquility prevailed and pervaded the limitless ocean. There was no question of drops of the ocean, and there was no separateness. There was limitless ocean as infinite everything. As the instant when the whim surged in the infinite everything of the creation point or Om point manifested as most finite everything. Infinite nothing was latent in the infinite everything, but when the whim surged, the infinite nothing got manifested through most finite everything, which is the Om point. That's starting to make a little more sense. I think it's just like the first urge, kind of. Thus, through the most finite everything, the infinite nothing is ejected gradually, manifesting itself as expanding ad infinitum. Simultaneously with the projection of the latent nothing and with the manifestation of nothingness, the consciousness which existed as nothing, latent in the infinitude of the God is state, also projected and manifested itself gradually as the consciousness of God, and made God experience himself as God the Creator of all things that projected out of his state of the everything as nothingness. So we are God experiencing itself. Nothing was forced to be something. Well, that's where we get into like some of the definitions that we've gone over already, where they're saying nothing, everything is nothing. This is just a shadow of reality. So, and nothing, when they say nothing was created, that's the same thing as saying everything was created, or which is super weird, but it kind of makes sense after a while. I don't know. Because everything is just a shadow, and therefore nothing. And nothing was created out of a focal point of everything. And that was the Om. Yes, use the Force. Yeah. Like, yeah, I mean, you can look at it that way, absolutely, and it's still right, I think. I'm learning this too. I'm not an expert or anything. I'm just reading a book. Where was I? Alright, whereupon, gradually gaining full consciousness, God, in the state of Creator, became entangled in the maze of most finite nothingness, found as infinite, stretched out and upheld through his own infinite trio nature. So everything was upheld by his infinite power, knowledge, and bliss. Alright, the paradoxical irony is that the infinity itself of God makes it infinitely difficult for God to escape the false apparent infinity of nothingness, which goes on expanding ad infinitum through the closely linked infinite trio nature of God, which is infinite power, infinite knowledge, and infinite bliss. I suppose that's what we are experiencing, since we are not separate from the consciousness of the Godhead or whatever. But this entanglement is absolutely necessary in order that God, in the infinitude of the God is state, should gain consciousness fully and completely for himself and of his infinite reality, and in this way experience consciously his unbounded, unlimited, infinite trio nature of infinite power, infinite knowledge, and infinite bliss. The fundamental fact is that full consciousness, once gained, can never be lost. It remains eternally, regardless of whether that consciousness fully gained is the consciousness of the false nothingness experienced as real, or whether that consciousness is the consciousness of reality itself. What? Eventually, consciousness does make God realize his own reality after the same consciousness has attained complete maturity. Okay. Consciousness is fully matured to realize reality only after it is nurtured by the apparent awareness of the false. This awareness of the false as real becomes so intensified during the course of the evolution of consciousness that the consciousness steeped in false awareness makes God aware only of the false, which is experienced by God as the real. That is, God the Creator falsely experiences the manifestation of the nothing as real and everything. Word. In order that the latent consciousness of God in the God is state should make it possible for God to realize his own eternal reality, the projection of the latent consciousness in everything, which, when projected outwards, becomes focused on the false infinity of nothingness, should be withdrawn inwardly. I need to read that sentence again. I'm going to read it without the parentheses. In order that the latent consciousness of God in the God is state should make it possible for God to realize his own eternal reality, the projection of the latent consciousness in everything should be withdrawn inwardly. By such an inward withdrawal, The focus of the same consciousness becomes centered on the infinity of everything, and in parentheses, from which it had projected outwards and given rise to the experience of infinite nothingness rather than the experience of infinite everything. As said before, when the projected consciousness withdraws inwards or undergoes full and complete involution, that nothingness which was once experienced as reality automatically vanishes for the consciousness which is now focused completely on the eternal reality of the infinitude of God. So yeah, when you withdraw consciousness and complete your process of involution, the nothingness vanishes, and you're completely focused on reality, or the infinitude of God, in short. Oh, that's funny. In short, there is no new consciousness to be attained to realize reality, the eternal. It is the same consciousness latent in the everything which, when it emerges out of the nothing, first gradually evolves and associating with the nothingness, then experiences the nothingness as real. When the evolution of this consciousness is complete and full, the same consciousness makes God experience the false nothingness, which expands ad infinitum as real and infinite. Again, when the same full and complete consciousness reaches full and complete maturity through its own involution, it realizes infinite reality as the only reality, and gives God the experience of his own real and eternal infinite state. Yeah, so it sounds like... Okay, yeah, it's pretty repetitive, but I guess it needs to be. God, in his original state of infinitude, is eternally infinite through his infinite, unbounded, and unlimited trio nature of infinite power, infinite knowledge, and infinite bliss. As God eternally is, the only virtual difference between the original state of God and the new states of God that he acquires is that the consciousness gained progressively through the impressions of the projected nothingness. Impressions meaning, I'm under the impression that I'm a human right now, stuff like that. God, in his original state of God is not conscious of his infinite eternal existence, nor of his own infinite nature, though he exists infinitely and eternally. Due to his own infinite whim, God acquires the consciousness of his reality and realizes his infinite, eternal, unlimited self to experience his unbounded, unlimited, and infinite trio nature. Thus God, now with his newly acquired state of eternal consciousness, is consciously and eternally aware of his original beyond the beyond state of God is, which is forever and ever unconscious of the infinitude of his own God is state. Therefore, the goal is to realize the eternal and infinite God state consciously. As already described, the original state of God is the state of unbounded absolute vacuum where God is and consciousness is not. This state is the original divine sound sleep state of God beyond the beginning of creation. Yeah, that reminds me of something from this picture I showed you guys earlier. I'm not sure if this interpretation is right, but it's saying that before the Om, before the first urge or creation, God is unconscious of himself and of any illusions, which is weird to me, but I'm gonna keep reading. Perhaps I'll figure it out as we go. The original infinite whim of God as the cause is responsible for breaking the spell of the original divine sound sleep state of God, and the result, which is creation, is called the effect. Yeah. In order to grasp clearly the divine sound sleep state and understand more clearly all that follows immediately after the original infinite whim surges in God, bestirring him from the divine sound sleep, let the divine sound sleep state of God be compared with the sound sleep of man. This sound sleep state of man is literally the same original divine sound sleep state of God. God in the God is state is eternal in the original divine sound sleep state, whereas God in the human state daily experiences alternately the sound sleep state and the awake state. So when we're sleeping, we go to a state of God, but like before we knew we existed and went through all of the illusions and all that, and evolved our consciousness into a human. Wow. The infinite, impressionless, and formless, eternal God experiences himself as finite, limited, inanimate, or animate forms or beings only because of the advent of the first most finite impression of the nothing that manifested as nothingness. So yes, because of the first urge, we experience ourselves as stuff. At one stage in the evolution of consciousness, the impressions of the nothing impart to God the experiences of the human state. These impressions of nothing are just the procreation of the original most finite first impression picked up by the most finite first ray of consciousness in God, made manifest simultaneously when the latent original infinite whim surged in God and projected the latent all of the most finite nothing as nothingness. The original most finite impression multiplied and increased simultaneously and concurrently with the evolution of the most finite original trickle of consciousness. The multifarious and varied impressions so formed were experienced by the greater evolution of consciousness through multifarious and varied media of finite or gross forms or material forms, because the impressions formed must necessarily be experienced by the consciousness. But for consciousness to experience the impressions, suitable media were absolutely necessary. You guys with me? Thus, the evolution of consciousness goes on evolving further and greater consciousness in conformity with the evolution of gross or material forms of relatively higher and higher types in order to experience the impressions gathered in conjunction with the preceding relatively lower types of gross media. Okay. Sorry, I had to read that again. In short, the most finite first impression of the original infinite whim surging in God gave to the unconscious infinite God the most finite consciousness. Gradually, varied impressions multiplied and increased and gained greater finite consciousness for God, until eventually the evolution of consciousness was complete, when the impressions of full consciousness gained identified God with human form. God, having now gained full consciousness in human form, the need no longer persists for additional or higher forms to evolve consciousness, as this consciousness gained is full and complete. During the process of evolution, so if in case you haven't been here, that's speaking of the evolution of our consciousness, how we went through all the forms from rock state to animals to birds to finally humans, and then our evolution of consciousness is complete, And that's when we start what we've been talking about, this process of involution, where we return to connect with with reality, basically. Reality being the oversoul. During the process of the evolution of consciousness, the consciousness, while identifying God consciously with varied finite gross forms, inanimate and animate, was also simultaneously, though unconsciously, identifying God with his limited subtle form and his limited mental form, these forms associated with the limited gross form of God in compact and homogeneous unconscious association throughout the process of evolution of consciousness, from the very advert of the first original projection of the latent nothing in everything. It is but natural that, together with the evolution of greater and greater consciousness of God, the evolution of the limited and finite subtle and mental forms simultaneously takes place, till in human gross form the limited subtle and mental forms of God are fully developed. So once that's saying that once you're a human, you go through gross or material consciousness, and then you keep evolving into the subtle, like energetic fields or planes, and then into the mental plane, and then finally to the oversoul. Though God has gained full consciousness in human form, and though the limited subtle and mental forms are also fully developed in human form, yet the full consciousness so gained is only of the gross, which gives experience only of the gross world. Hence, the fully gained consciousness is not yet conscious of the subtle and mental forms, nor does it consciously experience the subtle and mental worlds. In short, so that part still confuses me, because it seems to go back and forth about how we're like here in the material plane, but we're experiencing these subtle and mental vibrations, or at least we're drawing from them and using them, whether it's like directly or not. Maybe that's like a highly meditative state or something, where we tap into the mental and subtle worlds, or on psychedelics or something. Okay, back to the book. In short, though God in the human state has gained full and complete consciousness, he is still not conscious of his limited energy of the subtle form, nor of his limited mind of the mental form. Much less is he aware of conscious of himself as the one indivisible, eternal, and infinite God with unbounded power and unlimited knowledge. This is all of us, you guys. At this stage, God is only fully conscious of his identity with human form and its varied gross aspects, and experiences in full only the gross world as an ordinary human being of the world in the form of man or woman. And gross just means 3D or material. But the consciousness of man, together with his mental form as the mind, his subtle form as energy, and his gross form as the body, are all the outcome of the manifestation of the most finite nothing as infinite nothingness, which was latent in the God is state. In other words, the limited mind, the limited energy, and the infinite body are all of the nothing, and the consciousness of the limited mind and the limited energy and the infinite and the finite body is also of the nothing. Nothing is real, y'all. In man, the mind is the seat of desires and thoughts. Energy is the seat of force and vigor, and the body, typifying happiness, is the seat of happiness and misery. Hence, these desires and thoughts, force and vigor, happiness and misery, are respectively the finite aspects of the limited mind, energy, and body of man. Although these aspects of the finite basis of the triple nature of man, the mind, the energy, and the body, typifying happiness, are finite due to the fact they are the outcome of manifestation of the most finite nothing, yet these finite aspects of mind, energy, and body demonstrate their capabilities ad infinitum. Keeps using ad infinitum. I don't know why it doesn't say infinitely, but maybe we'll find out. This is because each of these finite bases of the triple nature of man, the energy, the mind, and the body, typifying happiness, is closely linked with and upheld by each of the three infinite bases of the trio nature of God: Sat Chit Anand, infinite power, infinite knowledge, and infinite bliss. Oh, wow. It's because each of the finite bases of the triple nature of man are closely linked and upheld by the bases. Okay, so mind is held up by I think that's what it's saying. Mind is held up by infinite power, even though mind isn't real, but the infinite power is. And then, I'm sorry, that would be energy. Energy would be infinite power. The mind would be infinite knowledge. And the body would be infinite bliss. How interesting. I'll keep reading now. The fact is that when the latent infinite trio nature of God is gradually manifested out of the gradual projection of the finite nothing, and when it is simultaneously protrudes the projection of the finite nothing as nothingness manifested ad infinitum, this very same infinite trio nature of God at this stage of manifestation becomes enmeshed in the apparent and false infinity of the nothingness, and thus gets itself expressed as the finite triple nature of man with capabilities demonstrated ad infinitum. How? 1, the mind, 2, the energy, and 3, the body, as the triple nature of man, demonstrate their capabilities ad infinitum in illusion is clearly experienced. 1, through the inventive mind of a scientist who finds no end to discoveries and inventions. 2, through the release of nuclear energy in illusion, which has reached a state where it threatens with its own force of illusion to destroy the very nothingness out of which it emerged and evolved into such a terrific force. And 3, through the body, typifying happiness, which now, keeping pace with the advanced progress of the evolution of nothing, is infinitely urged to seek greater and greater happiness, to such an extent that happiness actually becomes the very basis of the life of illusion. Wow. The only reason for such infinite demonstration in the field of nothingness, which is illusion, is because the basic finite triple nature of man, energy, mind, and happiness of nothingness, is upheld and stretched out ad infinitum by the basic infinite trio nature of God, infinite power, infinite knowledge, and infinite bliss of everything. Infinite power is unbounded and is never reduced nor exhausted, whereas infinite energy, through linked with infinite power, is reduced and exhausted because it is only the outcome of the nothing manifested as the finite energy of nothingness. Of course, nothing being everything in this, as far as we know it. Infinite knowledge is eternal, uniform, and all-pervading, and therefore is without a break in its continuity. The limited mind, however, though linked with infinite knowledge, is annihilated and made to vanish ultimately because it is the outcome of the nothing manifested as the finite mind of nothingness. Nothing lasts forever, right? Infinite bliss is bliss eternal and continual, and because it is perpetual, it is without any opposite aspect. Happiness, on the other hand, although linked with infinite bliss, is not perpetual, and therefore it is an opposite aspect of misery. This finite happiness vanishes, even though it is the very basis of the life of the human being, because life itself is transient, as the life of illusion is the outcome of the nothing manifested. As the life of nothingness, this life must perish. So don't worry, guys. Our power may come and go, but infinite energy... Oh, wait, I can't. I'm getting these words convoluted because I'm trying to grab them from the chapters I just read. Unbound is reduced, exhausted, limited nothingness, finite energy. Yeah. So don't worry, guys. When we finish our journey here, we will be linked, we will experience our infinite power, infinite knowledge, and infinite bliss, even if all of these things are but fleeting in this world. That is my quote of the day. All right. A stage is reached when man, in the travail to realize God, ultimately loses his basic finite triple nature, that is body, energy, and mind, and realizes the basic infinite trio nature of bliss, power, and knowledge. In this state, man experiences that his nature is not the finite body, but is infinite bliss, not the infinite energy, but infinite power, not the infinite mind, the finite mind, but the infinite knowledge. Thus man loses his basic finite triple nature and realizes that his is the basic infinite trio nature of God. This means that the basic finite triple nature of man, which was upheld by the basic infinite trio nature of God, is unlinked from the basic infinite trio nature of God. Convoluted sentence there, but I think we get the point if you've been with me for a while. Yes, it is reassuring, isn't it? Although the man loses his basic finite triple nature, the full consciousness that he gained in his travail is not lost, because full consciousness once gained is never lost, except in gross misuse of the powers of the fourth plane as previously described. In this state, with consciousness intact and complete, and even then, you just have to go do it again. In this state, which is with consciousness intact and complete, the limited and infinite body, the limited and infinite energy, and the limited and finite mind are all totally unlinked from the unlimited and infinite bliss, power, and knowledge, respectively. This is the stage when man is fully conscious and yet no longer experiences the false finite nothingness as real and infinite. The body, energy, and mind, which were instrumental in giving the experience of the nothingness, no longer grip the consciousness of man with finite impressions, thus are now unlinked and have simply vanished from the focus of the consciousness. They must vanish because they were of the infinite, of the finite nothing by nature, which literally means absolutely nothing. But before body, energy, and mind ultimately lose their grip over consciousness of man, there is one predominant experience which he has in his everyday life, that of sleeping and waking each day. This fundamental experience in a normal man gives rise to the three basic states in his everyday life. The first state is the sound sleep state of the state of complete unconsciousness of the self in man. The second state is the dream state, or the semi-conscious or semi-awake state. The third state is the completely awake state of the state of complete consciousness of the self in man as man. And just a note, when he says man, it means human. It's not like a gender thing. So there's three states. There's awake, asleep, and halfway there, which kind of confirms some experiences that I've had, where like some supernatural experiences, where I could have sworn, like night terrors or not. It doesn't have to be a bad experience, or just seeing like something otherworldly. I think that's a little bit confirming for me personally. Now, man's cognizance is life in man, and man's life is made cognizant through the actions of man. Actions are generated by the impressions of man and vice versa. These impressions of man are picked up and imprinted on the mind of man by actions. Impressions and actions are thus interdependent because impressions are fed by actions and actions are motivated by impressions. That was a lot of new stuff. Hey Debbie, how are you? I had some water and I need to drink it now. Thanks for the heart me. Appreciate you guys sticking around too. Hope you're all having a wonderful evening. I'm just gonna check how much is left here and the time. 2, 4, 6, 8. Got about 10 more pages in this. Oh no, keeps going. Oh, this is a long chapter. Okay, I might have to stop in the middle of this part and continue it next time, because it just keeps going and going and going. Okay, yeah, I'm probably not going to finish this chapter, but here we go. I'm going to read that last paragraph again just because it was kind of crazy. Now, man's cognizance is life in man, and man's life is made cognizant through the actions of man. Actions are generated by the impressions of man and vice versa. These impressions of man are picked up and imprinted on the mind of man by actions. Impressions and actions are thus interdependent because impressions are fed by actions and actions are motivated by impressions. Impressions to me basically means beliefs. As said previously, the source of impressions is traced as far back as the latent nothing in the everything, this first urge, which means God is in the God is state. When the nothing first became manifested as nothingness in the shape of creation, the primal manifestation of the nothing gave rise to the first trace of consciousness in God, and hereupon the first impression of nothingness manifested. The first impression procreated impressions with the evolution of consciousness. Accordingly, all impressions are of the nothing, and as nothing literally means nothing, these impressions are naturally nothing but mere impressions. But because it was through these very impressions of nothing that consciousness evolved fully and completely in man, the consciousness of man is closely linked with these impressions of nothing, and makes man consciously experience this false nothing as everything and real. Nothing's real, you guys, until we finish our journey. Impressions, as such, play a vital role in the life of man until such time as they are completely wiped away, relieving and freeing consciousness from experiencing the false nothing as everything and real. Consciousness, when relieved of all impressions, will no longer experience the false nothing as real, but it will experience reality as the unlimited self, i.e., God. As long as impressive impressions, right? As long as impressions persist and continue to impress the consciousness of man, these impressions activated and generated by the energy of man are being constantly imprinted on the mind of man and are being retained or stored in his subconscious. Ooh. Haven't talked about the subconscious yet. Some of these impressions remain dormant in the subconscious of man for hours or days or years, and sometimes even lifetimes, but most of them get projected through the subconscious of man every moment of his life while he experiences semi-conscious and fully conscious states, that is, the dream and awake state respectively. So the dream state is a semi-conscious state, and the awake state is fully conscious. I've always wondered if the dream states were more conscious than this, but this is saying, nah, maybe not. When these impressions remain absolutely dormant, the man is in his sound sleep state. When these impressions begin to get projected from the subconscious of man, they are hazy in their initial stages, being in varied sub-subtle forms molded out of the nothingness, and the man is said to be in a semi-conscious state, experiencing dreams through his subconscious. When these hazy impressions grow clearer in their final or ripe stages of projection, the nothingness in sub-subtle forms is experienced as gross forms, and the man is said to be in a fully conscious or awake state, experiencing the gross world through his full consciousness in a completely awake state. Puzzle time. Come on. All right. Got it. When the man wakes up, the projections of impressions of nothing manifest the same dream of nothingness more forcefully and realistically. In other words, the same dream is said to be at its height now in the awake state of man. So we're just dreaming more forcefully when we're awake, I guess. Is what that said? I don't know. Therefore, the awake state of man is the experiencing of that some hazy state of dreams. Only now they are experienced clearly, being at their height and in their fully ripe and final stages. The dream of a man is but a drama enacted by the projection of man's own dormant impressions. These impressions, when projected through man's subconscious, create things and creatures of the dream as subtle, sub-subtle forms. The dream of a man is but a drama enacted by the projection of man's dormant impressions. These impressions, when projected through man's subconscious, create things and creatures of the dream as sub-subtle forms. Wow. Man that resonates with me. I don't know about you guys. Man in the dream state not only becomes involved in the drama of his dream and plays the roles of both the creator of that dream and the hero in the drama of that dream, but in the drama, man also gets closely associated with things and the creatures in their sub-subtle forms, which are of his own creation in his dream state. This creation of sub-subtle forms comes entirely as a result of the manifestation of man's own past and present impressions. Thus, man in his dream state associates subconsciously with forms in sub-subtle states. Kind of makes sense why people have such different dreams. It's like based on their the subconscious impressions. When recollected by a man in the awake state, these very forms which he has seen and associated with in the dream state remind him of his conscious associations with the gross forms as things, creatures, and beings associated with his day-to-day life of the present, and link them with his connections and contacts established in his life of the immediate and sometimes distant past. Yeah, cool. Glad that makes sense to you, because it kind of makes sense to me. But more often than not, a man also recollects in his conscious awake state that a particular gross form, whether of a thing, creature, or being, with which he closely associates and which he actually seeks, reminds him of having witnessed that same object in his dream at some time in the past, either some days, months, or years ago. Okay, like when you're reminded of something in a dream, I guess. Thus, it actually happens that a form of the future, which he happened to witness in his dream of the past, reappears to the man as a gross form in his life association of the present. After a lapse of time, the same object that the man was totally ignorant of ever having seen or contacted before in his lifetime appears to him now in the awake state exactly as he had witnessed it before in his dream state. Is this like deja vu or something? Experiences of a similar nature are also recorded in which a man witnesses certain incidents in his dreams years in advance of their actual occurrence. Oh, that kind of explains how, like, people, like, make predictions and stuff like that. Maybe they're just so, like, tapped into their subconscious and their dreams are super clear about it or something. I don't know, maybe. How is it possible for man to witness in advance in the drama of his dreams such forms and incidents of futurity when his drama of the dream is only the outcome of his past and present everyday life impressions? Is it really possible in the dream of the present for one to come across and witness a certain object which is totally of the future, and to establish future associations with it in advance, yet all the while remain ignorant of the object until it is eventually contacted and consciously associated with in an awake state one day in the distant future? Even if such a thing be really possible, and if the future is being inadvertently probed by man in his dream, then from where does futurity spring into man's present? How could man living in the present through his own impressions of the past ever come to grips with futurity, even in a dream state, and associate in advance with impressions of future incidents and objects? What is it that endows man with the faculty of prescience? These very associations with future objects and incidents, though experienced inadvertently and unknowingly by man in the present, are automatically developed and are inevitably there by virtue of man's being the creator of the drama in his dream state. Wow. No sooner does man become the creator of the drama of his dream state through the projection of his dormant impressions than this very projection of his own dormant impressions reflects his past as if it were really his present, and man, finding himself involved in this drama, gets absorbed in his past while still maintaining his past to be his present. In this manner, Although all the time remaining in the present, the man inadvertently and unknowingly continues to preserve his past, maintaining it to be his present. But when the man continues to preserve his past, he, being the same time the creator, also concurrently becomes the preserver of his own creation through his spontaneous associations with the objects in the drama of his dream state. These very associations, though inadvertently established, maintain the continuity of the drama and endow the creator with the role of the preserver as well. In every wee bit act of preservation of all of that which has passed, man in his present, as the preserver of his past, inadvertently and unknowingly, also simultaneously establishes the future in his very present by the very act of preserving his past as his present, which present had remained always as the future of the past. I need to read that one again, sorry guys. In every wee bit act of preservation of all that which is past, man in his present, as the preserver of his past, inadvertently and unknowingly, also simultaneously establishes the future in his very present by the very act of preserving his past as his present, which present had remained always as the future of the past. What? I made a little more sense than I. Alright, take for example a man who finds himself living in the present of today and who looks upon yesterday as all of his past and tomorrow as all of his future. Yeah. Now, as soon as this man asserts that he is living in the present of today, he inadvertently and unknowingly has preserved that past of yesterday, not only as the present of today, but also as the future of tomorrow, just by maintaining himself as alive today in the present. Time isn't real, y'all. In every wee bit act of preserving that past of yesterday while maintaining himself as living in the present of today, that man also inadvertently and unknowingly establishes in his present of today this today as the future of yesterday. Okay. So it is that although the past and the future have their own stand, yet both of these are consistently and concurrently preserved only in the present. It is only because of the present that both the past and future find their point of fusion everlastingly in the present. In the eternity of existence, there is no time. I just said it. There is a footnote over time, and I'm going to read that. It's kind of long. The gross, subtle, and mental spheres exist only in imagination. Hello, how are you? Welcome. I'm reading a footnote after the sentence, in the eternity of existence there is no time. The gross, subtle, and mental spheres exist only in imagination, and so time and space exist only in imagination. Time, therefore, has no absolute value, and in each of the three spheres it has purely relative values that are quite independent of each other. Thus, time on the gross sphere is independent of time on the subtle and mental spheres. Time on the subtle sphere is independent of time on the gross and mental spheres, and time on the mental sphere is independent of time on the gross and subtle spheres. A dream is nothing more than an experience of gross things by means of the subtle organs, and we have all been told how a long and intricate dream may take place in an impossibly brief moment in the imaginary time which is measured by the movements of the hands on our wristwatch. Yeah, this does sound like some Jungian stuff. It also reminds me of psychedelics because it felt like a whole lifetime and it was just been a few hours or whatever. Okay, back to the main text. In the eternity of existence, there is no time. There is no past and no future, only the everlasting present. Therefore, in eternity, nothing has ever happened and nothing will ever happen. Everything is happening in the unending now, if there is anything happening at all, because all that has apparently happened, all that is apparently happening, and all that will ever apparently happen in the illusory cosmic universe is all that which God has already dreamt the moment his own original infinite whim surged as, "Who am I?" So really speaking, nothing has happened and nothing will ever happen. Cool. When man in his dream state associates with past, present, and even future forms, he simply invents the roles of creating association, then preserving the association and eventually destroying that association, while all the time maintaining that he is the witness to all these in the present of his dream state. That is right. Yeah, right? On these very, it's like just everything's just relative, is what I'm getting at this. Time, at least. On these very bases of the creation and preservation of all things, creatures and beings created and preserved, whether in the dream state or in the awake state, there hinges at every step in the present and inevitable destruction as the future of all things created and preserved. Interesting. Anything that has its beginning must have its inevitable end, and all things created must inevitably be destroyed, however much such things be preserved. Anticipating futurity advertently or inadvertently as destruction. In the very act of preservation, man in the present automatically becomes the preserver of all things he created in the past. Reminds me of Shikta and Shavi relationship from Hinduism. Man becomes the preserver, being in the know of the future that consistently confronts him in the garb of unfailing destruction that awaits its inevitable turn as futurity. Of course, man himself is really not aware that he knows the future, but the fact that he is the preserver shows that he must be anticipating the destruction. And as destruction belongs to the domain of futurity, the man, though not aware that he knows the future, is knowing it all the time that he is engaged in playing the role of the preserver in the present. And if you're just joining us, whenever it says man, it just means human. Nice. Me too. This book is actually helping me to clarify my thoughts, because we hear this kind of stuff all over the place, right? In songs and just different spiritual practices and on TikTok videos, and so this is kind of helping, I think. In the very act of becoming the creator, in the very act of becoming the creator, preservation of all things created follows, and the creator perforce simultaneously has to play the role of the preserver. Concurrently, in the very act of becoming the preserver, destruction of all things preserved is anticipated. Therefore, all things are inadvertently or advertently preserved, and the preserver therefore establishes in the present the future of all things created and preserved, anticipating the inevitable destruction. That reminds me of the Akashic records. God, in his original infinite divine dream state, eternally plays the three roles of the creator, the preserver, and the destroyer simultaneously. When God is in the process of preserving his own infinite creation, he is already at the... Oh, that would be Brahma. So you have Shiva, Shakti, and Brahma. Or Shiva, Shakti would be... Yeah, I think that's right. Don't quote me on that. But I think Brahma is the, preserver. And then you have the Shakti, the creator. I'm not sure about that one. And then Shiva's the destroyer, I'm pretty sure, in the male form. Time is the one thing binding all human beings to reality. Yes, and according to this book, reality is nothing but a vacant dream. And then actual reality would be once we fully involve our consciousness back to the state of one with everything, or the oversoul. Word. When God is in the process of preserving his own infinite creation, he is already at the same time in the future and having preserved what he created, which is past. The future is definitely established before him, even in his eternal present, which future will destroy what he created in the past and what he preserved in the present. Therefore, God, being omniscient and eternally of the present, knows of the past which he eternally preserves as the present. And also, at the same time, he constantly experiences his in advance, in his eternal present, all that which is of the future. No, I'm just kidding. Similarly, God, in the main state as man, inadvertently witnesses all the time in his dream state that which is also to be experienced in the future of his awake state. Man thus finds that he sometimes has prescience of things that come to pass after a lapse of time. So I guess we see the future in our dreams. To sum up, in the very act of creation, the acts of preservation and destruction are also present. So, by creating illusion, God, as it were, simultaneously preserves and destroys it. Creation, preservation, and destruction, all happening at once in the very act of creation. Yeah, because time isn't real, right? The illusion is destroyed. Amen. All right. In reality, therefore, I'm going to read for about 10 more minutes, just so you guys know. In reality, therefore, nothing is created that remains to be preserved and destroyed, because the created creation is of the nothing, and this nothing in reality means absolutely nothing in all respects. Sorry, I'm getting kind of bad at reading. Though this nothing is indeed nothing at all, yet when it is said that the nothing is created by Brahma, preserved by Vishnu, that's what it is, Vishnu, not Shakti. That's so funny. I didn't think it would reference that. Okay, I'm going to read this again. But now it clears it up. That's really cool. So created by Brahma, I was wrong. I said preserved. Preserved by Vishnu and destroyed by Shiva or Mahesh. So let me read that again. Though this nothing is indeed nothing at all, yet when it is said that the nothing is created by Brahma, preserved by Vishnu, and destroyed by Mahesh or Shiva, it is spoken of only in terms of the infinite illusion, in terms of the infinite divine dream state of God related to the illusory universe, the Brahman. Let's read the footnote under Brahman. How would you describe your beliefs, if you don't mind sharing? Well, nothing concrete, but this book, I do agree with this book, in saying that it says that everything is, all is the one and the one is the all. So I do kind of believe in that. Beyond that, I believe I can DM you. Like, I like what Bashar says, that there's like 4 universal truths. And my mind's too sucked into this to recite it right now, but I can send you that if you want. This is what seems most likely to me, and I'm not sure of anything because nothing's real apparently, according to this book. So here's that side note after Brahman. Of the three aspects, creator, sustainer, and dissolver, sustainer is the most important because the present, which sustains the past and the future, is most important. Therefore, Pravardigar, Vishnu, the sustainer, is the most important aspect of God. That's wild. I always wondered what Pravardigar means. It's the beginning of Meher Baba poem that Baba people will recite a lot. One of three main kind of prayers, I should say, not poems. All right, back to the text. In the eternity of reality, there is absolutely no such thing as creation, preservation, or destruction. Neither is there space, nor is there any scope for relativity. Much less could there ever be the correlated factors of time, such as the past, present, and future. In the eternity of reality, the one infinite, eternal, all-pervading existence is. In short, when the consciousness of a man makes him experience the impressions of the nothing subconsciously, the man is said to be dreaming a dream. When the consciousness of the man causes him to experience more realistically the impressions of the same nothing full consciously, the man is said to be dreaming yet another dream into the dream. Or he is said to be dreaming into the dream a vacant dream, experiencing the nothing into nothing. Hence it is said most appropriately that the world and its affairs are nothing into nothing, dream into dream. This means that God in the man state experiences the life of man as a vacant dream into the divine dream, which means creation. Or in other words, the life of man is yet but another dream of God in the dreaming of his divine dream or the creation. Yeah, fractals of consciousness indeed. I'm definitely will argue for that worldview. Yeah, absolutely. Through my experience. Although God in the man state has gained full consciousness and falsely experiences the multifarious impressions of the false infinity of nothingness as the reality of the gross world, this full consciousness and these innumerable impressions are all absorbed or gulped in while God in the man state passes away in the sound sleep state, indirectly asserting his original divine state of divine sleep, sound sleep. When God in the man state completely wakes up every day from his sound sleep state, the full consciousness which lay dormant during sound sleep and the multitude of impressions which had vanished, i.e. out of sight, out of experience, in the sound sleep are now all catapulted out to produce once again the false experiences of the finite nothing manifesting as real and infinite nothingness. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. This book is helping me understand a lot of that, of those experiences, Sky, as being perhaps I'm still trying to decipher what's what, as far as that seems to be like a subtle or a mental world or plane that we tap into, and then time is that's why it just seems like time isn't real, because like time moves differently. You can have a really long have a whole lifetime and then come back and it's been 10 minutes or whatever. I've heard people have that experience. There are some old Norse beliefs that say that the universe is inside Ymir's skull. That sounds like um it would, I don't know what Ymir is, but that sounds like very relative to this, except for Ymir would just be us, because it says that all consciousness is just one. So it would just be our, it's in, yeah. It's just a dream. Yeah. This unending chain of alternating absorption and ejection of consciousness and impressions in the alternating sound, sleep, and awake states continues until ultimately all of the impressions are ousted or wiped off clean through the experiencing of the opposite impressions in the processes of reincarnation and involution of consciousness. Thus, impressionless consciousness alone remains to give God the conscious experience of his original, eternal, infinite, real God state. Yeah, boy. But yeah, you guys are on it. As God invariably gains full and unimpressioned consciousness through the human form, the different states of man may be taken as examples with which to compare the different states of God. So our different states kind of reflect reality, but aren't. Is what my take on that. The sound sleep state of God in the man state not only resembles the divine sound sleep state of God, but is literally the same original divine sound sleep state of God in the beyond state of God is, where unbounded absolute vacuum prevails. I think that's talking about before you go through evolution and involution and back to self. I think that's what they mean by the God is state, or the sound sleep state of God, where it's not conscious of the self. And maybe that's the whole point of all of this, is because after you go through all of it, you are conscious of self, perhaps. I don't know, don't quote me on that. There is an asterisk, there's a footnote at the end of that, and I'll read it. It's quite long. I'm losing my light though, it's kind of tiny. There is a profound and very real relationship between God realization and sound sleep. The eternal desire of the soul is to become one with God, but because consciousness attaches itself to the material 3D, the soul seems to become one merely with the 3D. In the stone state, for instance, gross consciousness makes the soul identify itself with the stone, although in reality the soul is all the time one with God. To make this clear, let us suppose that you take opium or an intoxicating drink. You feel elated or depressed, although there is no radical change in your body, and it is only the consciousness that is affected and give rise to your feelings. Thus you, as an individual soul, are 24 hours within and one with God, although you feel merely gross conscious. Again, let us suppose that you feel tired and fed up and that you go to sleep. What is it you are trying to do? It is nothing but try to take refuge in God, your natural and inherent state. The whole creation, therefore, has this conscious or unconscious tendency to take shelter in God, the Oversoul, by entering the state of sound sleep for a time. Whoa, that's cool. Okay, I am done reading. There's a cool chart on the next page. And I will save that for next time. We are still in whatever part we started in. Usually I get through 2 or 3 parts, but I am not even seeing the end of this part. Goes through stages of something. On and on and on. Good. I'm glad you're hyped to go to sleep. Yeah, I feel you on that. We're gonna. I hope everyone enjoys returning to their God state tonight after they close their eyes and take a little break from all the work that we've just done. This chapter just goes on forever and ever and ever. I can't even. I gotta start flipping it differently. Oh, there's one. Oh, that's not even a new chapter either. I guess there's just no parts anymore. This one just goes on forever and ever. But that's cool. I read for an hour and a half, so thanks so much for sticking around with me. Hope you got something out of that. And yeah, I'll just say goodnight to everybody. Thanks so much for joining me. Consciousness is a trip, faux show. I agree with you there. Alright, guys. Sweet dreams.